Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Coffee with Ashish with Cloud Security Podcast. In today's episode, we are talking about infrastructure as code security. And I always love doing this, and I love talking about different topics that excite me and excite you as well. But before we can go into this, I need to bring in my current sponsor for the weekend for this week's episode.
Hey,
Sonius.
Ashish and Cloud Security Podcast listeners, thanks for giving Exonius the opportunity to sponsor the show. Exonius does exactly three things. By connecting to existing data sources, Exonius gives customers a comprehensive asset inventory, both cloud and on-prem. It then uncovers security gaps, and finally, it automatically validates and enforces policies. Thanks again, and check us out at exonius.com.
Awesome. I love how quick and sharp Exonius as well. So do check them out. They're sponsors for the season, and they've been quite supportive. So without further ado, if you are coming for the first time, this is Cloud Security Podcast. The bottom is where the audio version of this podcast would be available. We have a room running on Clubhouse as well, so you guys can dial into this. It's called the same thing, Infrastructure as Code Security. So without further ado, I've got a song for my man of the hour, and I cannot bring him on without this. So hopefully you guys can hear this.
Yeah, nothing like a Guns N' Roses entrance.
Yeah, like I'm so glad he came in, man. So infrastructure as code security could not be complete without having you here, Barak. So I'm glad you came in, and I love the song as well. By the way, there's a tradition, so I hope you have your cup, man.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for coming in, man.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start with the obvious that people have. I'm pretty sure we're looking forward to hearing from you. How did you get into this thing? So what was your journey into development and to where you are right now? Because technically you call yourselves developer, but you're cybersecurity now, man.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a journey. So I started programming at the age of 14. Found my way into a technological unit at the Israeli Defense Force, spent some time there building some big data systems. And then my first role outside of the Israeli Defense Force was for a cybersecurity company. I did some data science at the Army, and then I started to do data science at Forescale, which was a security analytics company that was acquired later on by RSA. Then I joined RSA, which is another security vendor.
Yep.
And I was very focused about on-prem security and anomaly detection, and I was the software architect of our group. And at some point, when doing DevOps for our team and building the architecture of our product for the cloud, I realized that there are a few gaps that I have as an architect when writing my Terraform and CloudFormation and serverless Lambdas. And this is where we decided to start Bridgecrew to handle our day-to-day pains.
Interesting. And for people who don't know what Bridgecrew is, because I mean, I've been a fan of you guys for some time. So what is Bridgecrew again?
Right. So Bridgecrew is an infrastructure as code security company. We help developers, DevOps engineers, SREs, and security engineers to secure their cloud infrastructure very early on, for the moment that you are writing code till it's deployed and after that.
Awesome. So this is like a question that I ask every guest in, because this is the Cloud Security Podcast as well. What does cloud security mean for you?
That's a great question. So I think cloud as a beginning is a huge opportunity because everything is defined in API. And cloud security for the first time means that you can enforce security using APIs all across the way. So if you're writing code that calls APIs, if you're running containers, you can run a lot of security scanning using APIs or very small agents and automation. So you can actually automate a lot of the scanning and remediation of security. So for me, cloud security is an automation framework or reality.
That is pretty awesome, because I'm amazed how everyone has a different definition of it, because I think people try and cover different aspects of it as well. And this is good, a great segue into the topic, which is infrastructure as code security. So what is, I've heard infrastructure as code. What is this infrastructure as code security? I have to play dumb over here.
All right. So Let's go back like 20 years ago. When you wanted a network security product, you bought an appliance. Later on, you had a VM, and later on, with the cloud, you had an API which helped you define a network ACL and a security group where you can define ports and what's allowed to go in and out in manners of traffic. And if you have that defined in API and you want to do it in scale, you start to write scripts that there is running and provisioning a lot of security groups and a lot of servers underneath those security groups. And if you want those APIs to have a state, there comes infrastructure as code. There is a set of manifests like Terraform, CloudFormation, Kubernetes, serverless framework, ARM templates, etc., and even Ansible and Chef that helped us as engineers to define how a predictable environment would look like in code. And if you define a predictable environment in code, you would like to define security controls to be predictable the same way. And when I'm saying predictable, it means that you deploy something 10 times, it will always deploy the same, no human interaction involved. And you want the same activity that you have for cloud infrastructure, you want to have the same predictability for your cloud security.
Yep, interesting. And the predictability is only possible in cloud as well. So this is quite a unique opportunity for people listening in to go, for the first time, infrastructure has API. Earlier, it would just be a sysadmin person. Hey, I need I need 5 servers, make that happen, a kind of conversation. Now it's like, oh, I can just write a one-line of script, which can make me create 5 servers in one go. So a very unique opportunity at that point. And it kind of makes me think as well, I wonder why a lot of people confuse this with application security as well sometimes, especially they feel like cloud security is just either infrastructure security or application security. So can you kind of tell us what the difference between application security versus infrastructure as code security is?
Yeah, so I can understand why people think those are the same. Infrastructure as code is code, and you can run static analysis on top of it. And application security is code, like Java and C#, etc., and you can run static analysis on top of it. So you have those two concepts that run static analysis. Why aren't they the same? And the main reason for that is, one, the attack surface is different. The problem space is different. Cloud infrastructure security is about cloud misconfigs, like you forgot to turn on encryption, backup and recovery, audit, etc. And application security is more like SQL injection vulnerability, third-party supply chain vulnerability, etc. So you need different experience as a security practitioner or DevOps engineer to solve each one of those. And also, in a lot of times, those are different personas in the organization. AppSec have their own team in large enterprises, and infrastructure security usually falls under the DevOps or SRE roles, because if you write the code that provision resources, you own it. So you build it, you own it, you fix it. And that's the current motion in infrastructure as code security.
Yeah. So in a way, it's a different threat landscape as well, I guess. You're looking at different problems. But I guess, would an application security person be infrastructure as code security person as well? Or is more like, I guess, is there like a delineation there, or do you see them kind of being done by the same person?
In some organization, I see them done by the same person, but like it's really like you have so many knowledge you need to grasp as a security engineer. And if the knowledge is there somewhere else in the organization, why not start there? So, for example, S3 buckets are usually not being watched by an application security engineer.
Yeah.
They are watched by DevOps and SREs. So they're probably the right person to fix that problem.
Right. Okay. And that kind of makes me feel the other half of the challenge as well is where, because it's hard. Do you find it really interesting coming in from a perspective that, hey, we are going into a very developer-friendly world first. Hey, Mark, I just came in with DevSecOps.
Yeah.
Well, actually, do you have a definition of DevSecOps for Mark?
Yeah, so it is a relatively new trend from the last few years. There is teams, well, I mentioned, like I tried to make it distinct between DevOps and security engineers. The reality is not that way, and AppSec engineers. The reality is that everybody need and should work together. And in some cases, those teams that work together in that that kind of culture shift are called DevSecOps, or Sec DevOps, or just DevOps, which is where operation teams, development teams, and security teams should work together as a cultural thing.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile calling out, because now we're kind of in a world where all these acronyms and names are being thrown out as well, right? So we've already spoken about infrastructure as code security, application security, DevSecOps, and because you kind of and I love the fact that you still call yourself a developer. What was the reasoning behind the whole developer first? What's that called? What's that? Why is that why was that important for you to have a developer first cloud security kind of like an approach? Because to your point, everyone's collaborating, right? So do we need to have this separate? Like, or where should we be driven from?
I think that JFrog is a cool DevOps company that said that every company nowadays, every big company is now a software company, from airlines to bookstores. Everyone are software companies. So if you want to help each and every company out there to be successful, you need to help their developers, because they are software companies today. So look at Amazon, who was a bookstore, now a software company. Well, for a lot of years, they are a software company. And if you want to help them to be successful as a development team, you need to help their developers by finding the right person very early on to fix a problem. So there is a term called shift left, which means generally is you might have a lot of Jira tickets that are flying after the fact when you're finding a security issue. But if you want to turn it left in the lifecycle from production and operation to QA and to dev, there is a way to do that. And it's by integrating to CI/CD pipelines.
Yeah.
And giving the value there, or into IDs and giving the value there.
Right. But to your point, it's, and I guess your point comes from maturity as well, because not everyone would be in a state where they're using CI/CD pipeline as well, right?
Well, you are correct. But if you want like to deliver the cloud at scale, you'll have some kind of CI/CD somewhere out there. Otherwise, you'll just have a lot of engineers doing manual deployment and manual configuration in the cloud, and it's just not scalable at some point.
Yeah, I've got a few people commenting as well. So Mark said, "Sound like job zero. Sound like job zero, irrespective of your role. Preventative controls, another one. Morning, Gerald as well. So we've got a few people coming online. I've got a few people in Clubhouse as well. I'm just trying to do a quickly reset of the Clubhouse room. So obviously, people who are joining the live stream for the first time, you can drop your comment. If you're on the live stream, you can drop your comments on the comment field. We'll get to the questions as we get to them. And we also have a Clubhouse room running, so you can dial into this, which I guess the information is on the website if you need it. And so I'll come back to the conversation. For people who are joining new in Clubhouse, on the bottom right, there's a hand icon. You can tap that to come and ask a question on the stage to Barak. Cool. I've got a first question already. Is there a file, for example, password.txt and OS where and how I can place controls? That's probably out of scope for this, Rajiv. This is more like, I think I see where he's coming from. So Rajiv is asking more from a context of placing a control at a file level in an operating system. It's probably not the context of infrastructure as code security, but I'm keen to know your opinion on this as well, if you have one.
Yeah, so there are options of scanning storage systems or endpoints using endpoint protection. So there are solutions for that. I agree, it's not part of the infrastructure security frameworks like Terraform or CloudFormation, but you can do an automation for that.
Yeah, and I think it's actually probably leads to a very interesting question as well, because I think where Rajiv's question came from the whole kind of taking that a step further, like a lot of people kind of still have the transition challenge where on premise the endpoint security is all about file integrity, like the integrity of the file hasn't changed, whereas in cloud it's all about, well, especially because servers have been click deploy. Whereas in the context of a cloud, to your point, you're using Terraform, you have Kubernetes, cloud formation, code pipeline. You can just like keep going. There's so many different ways of deploying into cloud to begin with. So it's probably worthwhile having that distinction. So is there another abstraction from, so it almost feels like there's infrastructure as code security, which is kind of what you and I are talking about, Terraform, Kubernetes containers. What else would you put in there that falls into the, I guess, the Bridgecrew category?
So everything around the traditional cloud security, from the infrastructure as code manifest themselves to the runtime status of a resource in the cloud. So whether it was provisioned using Terraform or other framework or not, if you have even a manually provisioned EC2, that would be an area of cloud security, because you want to know that it has an EBS that is encrypted, it is within a matching security group, etc. So solving the issues just in the code level is not enough. You should always monitor both code and runtime environment to get a full visibility of your cloud security.
Yeah. And I think there was another comment that came in. I think I understand where Rajiv is coming from as well. I think Rajiv, Mark has just answered your part of your question, saying, use things like Vault and Secret Manager. Try never to 100% never store credentials in your operating system. Rather, make a call to credit. Okay, so maybe if that's where it's coming from, that's definitely a great answer, Mark. Thanks for that, Rajiv. Hopefully that answers your question. I've got another LinkedIn user. Cost of fixing a vulnerability is cheaper if identified earlier in the life cycle. That's 100% true, my friend. I've got a question. So I've got a question from Abraham Reese. Which software would you recommend for a fresh security analyst to pick up first? Ansible, Terraform, SaltStack, Kubernetes. Ooh, it's a lot of words in there.
It's a hard one. As for trend, like it's public data. Ansible was the largest infrastructure as code framework out there, widely used. The thing is Terraform is the fastest growing one. So it's probably already over Ansible. So I would choose Terraform over Ansible. And as for Kubernetes, that's the largest open source in the CNCF. You should probably pick this up 2 over SaltStack. So my answer would be 2, Terraform and Kubernetes, probably.
Oh, perfect. And I think there's plenty of open source resource for this as well. So deep dive into Terraform and Kubernetes, and then you kind of go into infrastructure as code security as well. Is there someone you follow to learn Kubernetes online, or just Google searches?
So if it's around Kubernetes security, I really like a project by a guy called Madhu called Kubernetes Goat. It's a great tool. It's open source. It lets you provision a vulnerable by design Kubernetes cluster. And there is actually a katacoda for that, meaning a live course that you can do and see what issues that Kubernetes cluster has. And it also being scanned by some open source tools. So it's fun to watch.
Sweet. Cool. All right. Hopefully, Abraham then answered your question. Keep them coming. So I'll move back to, I think, just making sure I've answered all the questions. So I hope I answered your question as well, Rajiv. And Mark kind of definitely gave you a great answer there as well. We kind of gave you another perspective, but Mark definitely has shared another perspective for you. So for others who are joining the live stream, I see a few people joining in more. So for people who are joining in on both Clubhouse as well as on the live streams, which is a link on my profile, we're talking about infrastructure as code security with Barak from Bridgecrew. And we've already spoken about how different is application security to infrastructure as code security. And we've answered a few questions about choices between Ansible, Terraform, SaltStack, and Kubernetes as well. So that was the other extreme of the question that we went down the path of. But it's a great segue into my next one as well, is my next question as well. So Terraform, Kubernetes, CloudFormation. So there's another term that keeps floating around every time with infrastructure as code security, which is configuration as code. Or some people even go down the path of policy as code as well. So how do you see them being different to infrastructure as code?
All right. So infrastructure as code is a way to write a cloud configuration defined in different manifests. There is also, which is a declarative way of defining how your servers will look like generally. There is an imperative way of doing that. You can also, instead of learning your own language, you can use CDK, which would be Python or TypeScript or Pulumi. And you can write infrastructure as code in that manner too. And there is a term called policy as code. I guess that you meant that.
That's right.
So policy as code would be a way to automate enforcement or preventative controls while you're writing the code and scan your code for misconfigs before you apply them to production. We actually have an open source around that called Chekhov that lets you write policy as code for infrastructure as code security. And it also comes with more than 500 or 600 baked-in policies created by the community. So you should check that out.
Go. Oh, so I'll probably leave the links for the open source repos over there as well. And I've got a question from Camille coming in soon. 1 second. Let me 1 second. Let me just bring him on. Got a question from Clubhouse from Camille. And I have him here. Hey, Camille. Thanks for coming on the show, man. Do you have a question for Barak?
Good to see you again. Actually, not a question. What I wanted to add is that we've been using Chekhov, as you mentioned, this tool for tests. But recently we have seen a great tool called Spacelift. Spacelift is a kind of, check this out, it's great, because it allows you to automate the security and the compliance with Rego. Rego is something you could see with OPA, so Open Policy Agent. It is mostly commonly used in Kubernetes. But what Spacelift does, it allows you to specify your rules, the times when the following deployment could be done, and all of that is written in Rego. Great tool. I have a question.
Yep, go on.
One small. Have you ever tried like CDK? So past week I told I will be checking this out, but I didn't have chance. So have you tried CKD for Terraform, like with any other language you wanted to do?
Did you get a question, Barak?
Yeah, I did try CDK. My personal taste is I prefer Terraform. Like I have to have a very strict defined language around cloud infrastructure because it's very easy to read a declarative language. I don't have like magic tricks of code like reflection and unpredictable stuff happening on my cloud infrastructure, and it's very easy to inspect and collaborate on. I do see the advantages of CDK because people want not to learn a new language, like they want to use what they know, like Python or TypeScript. But my personal opinion is it is worth to learn a new language if it gives you the right tools.
Did I answer your question, Camille?
I was rather thinking about stability of CKD. So,
the stability of CDK or CDKs.
It's pretty stable now.
Sincerely.
Awesome.
Conversation. I will get back to the audience.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Camille. Great question, man. And always good to see you as well. Cool. So I've got a question from Darpan as well, who's also another regular person on, he's one of my previous guests as well. Would love to hear some thoughts on post-deployment infra security. Any thoughts on that?
Yes. So we talked about pre-deployment. You need to scan as early on to prevent stuff from happening. But let's say that you have a production environment and you have an SRE getting a phone call overnight asking him, hey, you need to change something in that server. He'll probably do a manual change instead of having to write code, etc. Those things happen. So if you want to really know and have the full context over what's running in production, you should have post-deployment infrastructure security controls in place. So that will give you full visibility and the full context on what's happening on production, whether it was defined in code or not. Another scenario is not everything can be or is always defined in code. A lot of organizations are having a kind of a 80-20 percentage of defined in code and defined manually. So for those stuff that are defined manually, you should have controls on runtime.
Cool.
And some organizations are in the transition to infrastructure as code and don't have anything there. So it's also a case.
No, good to share. And I'll Darpan, if you have an opinion yourself as well, I'd love to hear that as well, man. Thanks for that question. I've got Mark. He's definitely had coffee today. He's quite active today. OPA is fabulous for pre-flight checks, policy validation, and prevention control. Thoughts and comments on that?
Yes. So a lot of people are comparing Chekhov and OPA, and I'm really thinking they are competing tools. OPA has the way to analyze Terraform plan, and you can write policies in Rego. Personally, I find Rego harder than Python. And also OPA have other use cases like authorization and admission control, where Chekhov is scanning actually the code itself, not plan files. And it is also multi-infrastructure as code framework, and it comes with a set of built-in policies, where in OPA, it's like other bundles that you need to take care of. So they can complete each other. Like if you want to have your infrastructure as code scanned by Chekhov, you can. And if you want to have an admission controller using OPA, you can. So I see a lot of mixes in some of the organizations. And it's really a matter of the level of complexity you'd like to get it on, even though I've seen people doing crazy stuff with Chekhov and OPA, and your personal flavor.
Oh, yeah. I think I've got I think Mark has worked on the CDK as well. So he said for stability improvement with CDK to be version 2, which is a monorepo. So there's some more improvements, I guess, from the stability perspective. Okay, so I'm glad Camille just came back as well. Hey, Camille, just there's a further comment that came straight after. Further stability improvement with CDK v2, which is a monorepo as well. Not sure if you've tried that yet, Barak.
I think that the question was about CDK-TF previously. So I've tried the CDK-TF and the CDK.
Oh, right. Sorry.
I was having fun with both. Yeah.
Oh, no, fair enough. I kept mixing them up, I guess. We've got Rajiv back with another question. Is there a module or something in Terraform that scans for hard-coded open text password, scans for misconfig, adding more to my question if a policy to block SNMP protocol, which I scan IAC for policy violations?
So definitely, you can define in Chekhov. So Chekhov has a built-in check, for example, to check for hard-coded AWS access keys, and also Linode keys and other PaaS and IaaS frameworks. And you can also write a custom check to block SNMP protocol. It's pretty easy. It's probably 9 lines of code to write this custom policy.
Sweet. Hopefully that answers your question, Rajiv. I've got another question from Sahil. Where do you start with cloud infra security? Can you help lay down a blueprint for beginners in this field? Great question. I was going to get to it later, but I think we can answer it now since Sahil is already here.
So there are a good set of practice projects. There is Kubernetes Goat that we mentioned for Kubernetes, but there is also TerraGoat, CDK Goat, and CFN Goat for CloudFormation. So those Goat projects, their meaning from OWASP is to have a vulnerable by design infrastructure. So you can use each of those Goat projects to kick the tires. And you can start with using the open source tools like Chekhov or OPA to scan for infrastructure misconfigs and see what's out there.
Awesome. And I definitely have to call it out that I wasn't aware of OPA until all of you guys started talking about it. I've learned something as well today. I've got another person, Kevin, who's a regular on the show as well. Regula by, I don't know how to pronounce Fuge, is OPA based. And similar to Chekhov is in that it does infrastructure as code scanning and is open source. So both, I guess, Chekhov and Regula are open source, and OPA is open source as well.
Yes, that's correct. All of them are open source.
Sweet. So I'll definitely recommend people check those options out as well. DARPA, there is a Terraform Sentinel natively supported by HashiCorp. Straya is another nice OPA-based solution for those policy as code declarations. Stu, what are your thoughts on policy as code? I always wonder. Thanks for that, Darpan. Because I think we kind of touched on this earlier. Config as code, policy as code, infrastructure as code, everything is as code as well. So where do you see like CF and NAG is that's a good one as well for cloud formation templates. There's a lot of open source guys. It's pretty amazing. There's a lot of open source going on right now. Awesome, you answered Sahil's question as well. So, like, do you see like this at some point consolidating? Like, I think because you know how we have like infrastructure as code. I think for me personally, I feel like there should be policy code in there as well. Config as code is like I still put them under the same umbrella as infrastructure as code security. Do you put them in the same umbrella as well? Or is that more for, that's like there's a line there?
There's not necessarily a line because policy as code is a good practice to have, even not for security best practices, but also for cost. Like you don't want to have expensive servers turned on. That can be a policy. You would want to have backup and recovery in place. That can be a policy. So I see them go hand in hand. There is no clear line there.
And so that kind of comes to the next question then. Do you see misconfig? And I remember seeing a presentation from you a while ago. How common is misconfig, even if you take Terraform, or how common is it? Because for people like, well, I don't know they might just think, why would I use this? So I think you had a stat someday, but I don't know if you remember the stat, but curious to know how common is misconfig?
Well, it's been a while. About a year ago, we scanned thousands of open source infrastructure as code modules from GitHub. And we identified that almost one in every two open source modules have a misconfig. We've done some work with the open source contributors to fix that over time. But there is a big chance that you'll have a misconfig, not because there is like a big appetite to compromise your cloud by those open source users. They've written good software and they just wanted to share it with the community. But the thing is that each module is very opinionated, and it has some defaults, and you should not always use the same defaults for your environment. You should consider which defaults you'd like to have when you're using a pre-made infrastructure as code module.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great answer as well, because it's kind of like, it reminds me of the CIS benchmark thing. It's great, but you kind of need to reconsider that if everything applies to you, like what if you have a multi-account structure in AWS and all that? So great answer as well there. So that probably brings me as a good segue into the next one as well, because we've been talking about OPA, CF and NAG, and all these other open source tools, right? For people who are listening to this and going, I have a paid version, why should I consider open source? Like, so what are the, like, and I know we are very, as a community, we are very open source friendly. I love open source as well, personally. What do you, for people who are thinking of making a decision between open source versus a paid version, what are some of the things people should consider, whether it's for infrastructure as code security in general, because you're a co-founder as well. So where do you see that as a gotcha between, like, what should people think about? And I had to take a moment to frame my question as well. What should people think about as why should they go for open source versus a paid version? When would they make that call?
As entrepreneurs or as users?
As users, I guess. I'll probably make that call as users. So you're a developer yourself. You have an open source option in front of you. You have a paid option. I guess some people might just go, I just want open source because I want to do it myself.
Yeah, so the thing that I start with, usually as a developer, I start with the open source or with the free version, just to have something running. Yeah. And whenever I get into the first wall, I usually check the paid version and see if it's worth my time of writing more pieces of code to handle it, or can I get it like for a few more dollars, and it would help me scale. It's a matter of maintainability and the amount of effort you'd like to put into it over time, and the amount of focus you'd like to have it on top of it. So there are a lot of vendors, not only Bridgecrew. I'm trying to be vendor agnostic in my answer, that rely on open source tools and have the power of the community with them. And I think that as a developer, you just want to try and see the value as fast as possible, and you should go where you see the value. If it's a paid version, go for it.
Yeah, and I think worthwhile calling out, the paid version would come with support as well. Whereas open source, if you go down that path, to your point about the maintenance, you kind of have to be okay with the fact that you would have to maintain the code for the life of it being used in the company.
It's a matter of also as a responsibility as an engineer. So let's say that you have taken an open source and I'm not saying that Chekhov is like that. Chekhov is very simple, but you have an open source that you need to put effort on a daily basis to maintain it within your organization, to keep whether your application security secure or your cloud security or your corporate security there, you need to maintain that open source. It means that you're putting money into it, but in a different way. You're putting people and salaries and time into it. And you can have this time saved if you're just buying a tool instead of getting more and more people. And it's hard in the security landscape to hire good people. So that's the trade-off.
Valid point, my friend. I'm going to ask another question on this space, because I think you're definitely seeing, because I think Bridgecrew open source repos have probably been one of the fastest growing as well, in my opinion, and I'm sure in the wider opinion as well. I wanted to kind of ask, like, where do you see this grow, or where do you see this go into in the future? Like, where do you see this infrastructure as code security space become as you kind of go deep into it? Because you guys recently released the whole VS Code version as well, shifting more. I'd love for you to kind of go into that. Like, when you started the whole infrastructure as code, we're talking about Chekhov, Terraform, Kubernetes, how to do security well in that space, and now we kind of like the visual code scenario as well from you guys. Can you explain that whole transition? Why going in that direction, and where do you see the whole industry kind of go as infrastructure as code security?
I think that the thing that we have in mind is we try to help the user persona. And how does our user persona, the DevOps, SRE, or security engineer, use infrastructure as code to security? They usually start with open source, like Terraform or Kubernetes. So the first, most friendly way to approach them and give them the right tool would be in the same distribution manner, which is open source tool. So we started an open source tool called Chekhov, and we made sure that it is, one thing, very easy to use. Second, very easy to contribute more content into it. So we really wanted the community to be built around it and to contribute more policy, so you'll have the power of many.
Yep.
And three, to be very approachable. So we chose to open source Chekhov for those reasons, and I don't know how, but it succeeded. And when we open sourced the VS Code extension, we asked ourselves, all right, we saw people running Chekhov in CI/CD pipelines, and we asked them, what can we do better? And they are saying, like, all right, CI/CD pipeline takes 40 minutes after running unit tests and deploying, et cetera, et cetera. How can I run it faster? So we took the Chekhov open source tool and created another wrapper around it for VS Code extension. And VS Code is the most popular IDE out there.
Yeah.
And we try to help all of those DevOps engineers by just having answers in seconds to their while they're writing code to misconfigs that they're writing in infrastructure as code. So this is how we came out with the VS Code one.
Great approach. So do you reckon the future is kind of moving in that direction, where you're going to have to be able to pick it up not just at, say, a code commit? It's more, it kind of has to be in the IDE level.
Yeah, definitely. So first, more and more power is coming into CI/CD pipelines, and probably the next trend would be to IDEs, especially when Code Spaces is probably coming soon. So Code Spaces is the web version of VS Code that was announced, and it's going to come soon. So
that's going to be really interesting. Yeah,
that's going to be really interesting. More power to the developer would be inside the IDE.
Yeah, I'm personally looking forward to that as well, because VS Code takes a lot of time to install on a MacBook. Like all these updates that keep coming in as well. So I'd love to see that version change. I've got a comment from Kelvin. Pulumi likes to compare infrastructure as text versus infrastructure as software. to clarify ISE options that use DSL versus general purpose programming language. Actually, it's a good primer for people who may be not from a developer background. What's the difference between a DSL and a general purpose programming language, according to you?
Yeah, so a domain-specific language would be very much like a config file in some manner, and you are limited in the things that you can do. I personally like limitations. It's good to have boundaries, in my opinion, in some code aspects. And Pulumi can be written in generic language like Python or TypeScript, so you can do anything with it. It might lower the barrier for some engineers who wouldn't like to learn a dedicated DSL, and for others it might be a place for more complexity, because if you can do anything, you can write more complex code. The good thing about Terraform as a DSL is that they added loops and conditions over time, and it is being more like a programming language over time, but yeah, it is limited compared to Pulumi, which is in Python or TypeScript.
Yep. So I guess your personal preference is Terraform, so over Pulumi.
Yeah, Terraform, but that's just my opinion. I guess that Kevin has an otherwise.
Yeah. Oh no. I'm sure Kevin doesn't hate or love another one, but I'm pretty sure it's kind of good to get it out there, because I saw the question like, oh, actually, we haven't spoken about DSL, general purpose language as well. So that was great comments there, Kevin. So I'm gonna switch gears now, because I know we've been talking about open source and how do we do infrastructure as code security, but I do want to talk about you as a startup founder as well. For people who may not be familiar, Bridgecrew, the company that you are, I guess, co-founder and CTO for, there was a really amazing deal that happened between yourself, the Bridgecrew guys, and Palo Alto. I won't go into the details of it, but I do wanted to kind of bring it back to some of the audience members that we have are I guess they have their own startups, or they are currently working on their startups as well. So it'll be good to kind of know, like, as one of the successful startups, like, you kind of went in a very different way, where it was developer first, instead of, hey, I'm going to make a paid product because I want people to pay for it. So what was the motivation going behind a paid product, a developer first open source product, because you were a developer yourself, or what kind of triggered that kind of movement for you personally for your startup?
All right. So our first tier is open source, but we do have a larger product that is paid, and there are lots of companies that are using that. And our way to build that product was both the open source and the commercial, was just ask people how they solve their cloud security issues. And we went to more than 120 or 180 discussions with people from Netflix and other, like, we talked with people from Airbnb and other cool companies that have been doing that for years. We just asked them, hey, how are you doing that, without getting into too much details? How are you doing cloud security? And the answer was, we have a finding in the cloud. We open a Jira ticket and we send it to the engineers. And we were like, all right, so the people that are actually fixing stuff are the engineers. Why not help them instead of trying to fix the Jira pipeline? So it's not for every company, but in a lot of companies, that was the common denominator. So we started with creating Chekhov, an open source tool, and we got more and more validation on that topic, that it can be solved early on. And this is how we started.
That's pretty awesome. And I love that you guys have taken over the infrastructure as code security space as well. So I'll definitely encourage people to check out the company and the open source repositories that you guys have. Is there I know many developers listening to this and who's like, oh, Barak is a developer himself, who's kind of started his own company. What do you, I guess, what's your, I guess, advice for a younger Barak who's trying to get into the whole startup space and he or she is a developer as well?
Always be curious. Always try to learn something new. And if don't do the same, work twice, always automate everything. So that's my
That's pretty awesome. I'm gonna switch gear one switch gear back to where we were before, because I got a question from Sahil, and I think he's probably starting off in cloud security. So if we can help him out, I'll definitely do that. His question is, how do you take care of multiple cloud services and environments, as there is no standard approach defined that works everywhere else? Do you have an answer for that as well?
I'm going to go for Chekhov.
Version of the answer for him.
I'm going to go with Chekhov this time again. So Chekhov can scan multiple infrastructure as code frameworks, which works on multiple services and multiple clouds. And it has baked-in policies from the community, from people who know better than me. So I'm using that as a source of learning, because even when I'm writing today, I have someone contributing a new policy that all right, I didn't know I should secure this service that way. So I'm using that as a framework for myself to learn how to write a more secured infrastructure in the cloud.
That's awesome, man. And I good on you for saying that as well, because it shows how humble you are as well. Because I mean, there's always something to learn, right? It's like it never ends. It never ends. I'm glad Kevin came back as well. By the way, my opinion is to use whatever IAC helps makes you secure, and you can be productive with. Thanks for. I knew you, man.
I agree.
I knew I would definitely gel. Thanks for that, Kevin. So this is towards the end of our conversation, and I'll let people who kind of came in later and missed out on this, I'll let them go onto the live stream later on, kind of catch up and maybe get back in touch with you for questions. But this is kind of like the tail end, so this is kind of the fun question side. And I've got 3 questions for you, not too many. The first one being, what do you spend most time on when you're not working on Bridgecrew or open source or being a developer?
I really like to go to the beach. So I don't know if you ever had a chance to be in the Tel Aviv beach. It's a nice place to be in. I really recommend it.
I'm looking forward to that, because I mean, coming from the Australian beaches, I've heard about a Tel Aviv beach quite. So once things open up, I'm definitely looking forward to kind of exploring a lot of Tel Aviv, and it's going to go into what other aspects of Tel Aviv that I want to explore. But before that, what is something that you're proud of but is not on your social media?
My young son have started to take his first steps recently, which is fun. Yeah, so now I have 2 toddlers running here. I'm proud. I'm proud. That's pretty awesome. I'm a proud father. Yeah,
that's pretty awesome. And I think it definitely the lockdown has helped, I guess, in that case.
Yeah,
we were testing this. One of the silver linings of being in lockdown, I guess, outside of the whole boredom. The final question: what's your favorite cuisine or restaurant that you can share?
I like Mediterranean food and Georgian food. So those are the 2 that I like the most.
What's a Georgian food? Like, what is an example for Georgian food?
Jordanian.
Jordanian?
It's like Eastern European. You have I don't know if it's a word in English, but khachapuri, which is
okay.
I just checked in Google. It's the same. You'll get a picture when you type in it in Google Photos. It's a good some kind of, I don't know if dumpling or a bread with cheese inside and eggs inside. It's a good one.
Anything with dumpling, cheese combined, that's definitely great, man. Like two of the really popular things. Because that reminds me of a word that you and I were talking about just before we kind of went live. That I keep hearing from startups that start in, or I guess at least the startup community seems to talk a lot about in Tel Aviv, Israel. Chutzpah? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
So do you feel like you need chutzpah to succeed as a startup? And probably explain to people what chutzpah is, if I don't.
So it means a lot. It can be the ability to dare, and it can also be defy an authority. It depends. Well, you can do it in a humble approach. But if you want to disturb a specific market, you need to fight against or to explain how to build how to educate the market to build something new and to do something differently.
Yeah.
Or you need to fight against other larger players and explain why your way is better. So you might need some chutzpah, but there are like elegant ways to do that.
Awesome. And I do want to call out for all the Hindi-speaking Indians out there or non-Indians out there who speak Hindi. There's a word which is similar, and I think I was talking to Barak about this earlier, called jasba, which means very similar things. And you're like, I don't know how, but Hindi and like Hebrew kind of somehow gelled somewhere in the past, and they've kind of come up with the same word for similar word for the same context as well. One final comment that came in from Rajiv is lots of opportunities in government and DoD space. Check DISA and meter attack framework. And if you could automate them, let me know. So anyone who's listening wants to automate DISA and meter attack framework, definitely in the DoD space, there's a lot of opportunities there. But that's pretty much what we had time for, man. So thank you so much for taking the time out. For people who kind of have follow-up questions and want to get in touch with you, where can they connect with you? Where do you hang outside on social media?
So probably Twitter, it's Barak Schoster is the handle, or LinkedIn. I'll be available there. And also we have a Slack channel that I'm available. It's at slack.bridgecrew.io. So you can sign up and just direct message me.
Awesome. And I'll leave those social comments on there as well. But this was awesome, man. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I am going to close the Clubhouse room as well. And I'll see everyone in Clubhouse in the next weekend's call, I guess. But thank you, everyone who participated. Thanks, Camille, for asking the question as well. And I'll see you on the Clubhouse room soon. For people who are joining us live on the other live streams, I will see you all next week as well. It's always a pleasure to have you guys, and we'll have another version of the Cloud Security Podcast next week. But for the moment, thanks so much, Barak. I'm looking forward to having you on and probably seeing you in person in Tel Aviv soon, man.
Yeah, looking forward for it.
Awesome.